My name is Samantha, and I just graduated from high school. I live, or rather, lived, with my parents, Sarah and David Mitchell, in a modest two-story house in Pennsylvania. I also have an older brother, Jake, although he moved out a few years ago. He's 25 now, 7 years older than me, and has always been the golden child in our family. I watched as my parents bent over backward to give Jake everything he wanted. If he showed even the slightest interest in something, they were on it immediately. Hockey? They got him the most expensive gear. Drawing? Sure, the best art supplies. Skateboarding? A custom-made board. It didn't matter that, within a few months, he'd get bored and move on to something else. They were ready to fund whatever new interest he picked up. But things were different for me. I remember one Christmas in particular that stood out. Jake's birthday was a week before Christmas, and the year he turned 16, my parents bought him the super expensive gaming computer he had been dreaming of. It must have cost a fortune. By the time Christmas came, I eagerly opened my gift, only to find a card inside that simply said, "Merry Christmas." They explained that they'd run out of money. It was always like that. Jake's birthdays were grand celebrations, and at Christmas, I got whatever was left, if anything. My own birthdays usually consisted of a small cake, a new shirt, or maybe a set of school supplies. No parties, no surprises, nothing special. So I was completely taken aback when, a week ago, my parents sat me down in the living room and told me they wanted to throw me a real party. It started with my mom, sitting on the couch and nervously smoothing out her shirt, the way she always did when trying to appear casual, saying, "We've been thinking. You'll be turning 18 soon. That's a big milestone. We want to throw you a real party." I almost choked on my coffee. A party? I repeated, thinking I must have misheard her. "Of course, sweetheart," my dad confirmed, nodding with an unusual amount of enthusiasm. "We'll invite the whole family and make it a real celebration." I sat there, staring at them, trying to make sense of what was happening. My parents weren't the type to suddenly change their ways without a good reason. This was strange. "Why now?" I asked, trying to hide my growing suspicion. "Well, you're finishing high school and heading to college soon," Mom replied, waving a hand like it was obvious. "Things are different now. You're becoming an adult." I nodded slowly, but the feeling that something was off didn't go away. Their behavior was too convenient, too sudden a shift. "I still don't get it. You've never wanted to throw me a party before. Why now?" I pressed, trying to keep my voice even. Mom hesitated for a moment, and Dad quickly interjected, almost too eagerly. "Because we love you, Samantha. And because you deserve it." The words sounded right, but the tone felt wrong. There was something they weren't telling me, something behind this sudden burst of generosity. I could feel it in my gut. Maybe it was some family obligation. Or had something happened that I didn't know about? I had no answers, just a vague sense of unease that grew with every passing second. Over the next few days, I caught myself worrying about the upcoming party. Maybe I had been too quick to judge my parents' intentions. After all, it did make sense. I was turning 18, had just graduated high school with honors, and was about to head to college. Perhaps they had finally realized I deserved some attention and recognition too. Mom was on the phone almost constantly, lowering her voice as if discussing something extremely important. One day, I overheard her ordering a fancy cake from the local bakery, then discussing decorations and finalizing a guest list. Dad, on the other hand, had suddenly taken an interest in cleaning up the backyard and fixing the garden furniture he had ignored for months. "Do you need any help?" I offered, noticing him painting an old wooden table. No, sweetheart," he said, waving me off with a smile. "We want everything to be perfect for you." It was strange, but I decided not to push it. Another day, I found Mom in the kitchen, surrounded by lists and plans. When I walked in, she jumped and quickly hid some papers. No, no, sweetheart, we want it to be a surprise. Just enjoy your special day, she said with a strange smile. I shrugged, grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl, and asked, will Jake be coming? Of course, he'll be here, Mom replied, but her voice wavered. He wouldn't miss his little sister's big day. I wanted to believe her, but Jake hadn't responded to any of my messages all week. That was typical of him. He was always too busy with his own life to care about anyone or anything else. 2 days before the party, I went downstairs late at night to get a glass of water. As I passed by the staircase, I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. I usually don't eavesdrop, but there was something in my dad's voice that made me stop. David, are you sure everything will be perfect? Mom's voice sounded tense. Your mother is very particular about these things. I froze. Grandma Eleanor? She was coming. She lived in Massachusetts and rarely visited us. The last time I saw her was 2 years ago. Sarah, we need to do this, Dad replied. Your mother needs to see that we're making an effort to fix things with Samantha. You know how she feels about how we treat the kids. I know, Mom sighed. She's always saying we favor Jake. We can't afford to upset her right now. The money she gave us last year is the only thing keeping us afloat. If she decides to stop supporting us. They lowered their voices, but I'd already heard enough. Suddenly, everything made sense, the sudden interest in my birthday, the carefully planned party. None of this was for me. It was all for Grandma Eleanor. They were trying to impress her so she'd keep helping them financially. I sank onto the top step of the staircase, feeling my throat tighten with disappointment. This wasn't a celebration for me, not a gift or a recognition of my importance. It was just another performance, only this time, the star of the show wasn't me, it was Grandma Eleanor. She'd always been different from my parents. Unlike them, she saw Jake's charm, but she didn't blindly idolize him. Every time she visited, she actually paid attention to me. Her questions were sincere. She remembered what I was interested in and always took the time to talk to me about what mattered to me. I sat there in the dark, staring at the flickering glow of the kitchen nightlight, unsure of what to think. My parents' words echoed in my head. Everything they were doing wasn't for me. I was just a convenient excuse, another tool in their attempts to manipulate someone else. And yet, I couldn't let myself cry. Instead, I took a deep breath and forced myself to stand. After all, the evening was still ahead. I had to decide how I was going to handle it, on their terms or mine. The morning of my 18th birthday began with the sounds of lively chatter outside my window and my mom's overly cheerful tone. I was still in bed, not fully processing that this was the day that was supposed to feel special. Getting up and looking out the window, I saw a familiar figure climbing out of a silver Toyota Camry. Grandma Eleanor. My chest tightened, a mix of joy and anxiety so strong that I almost closed my eyes, hoping this was all just a dream. I quickly threw on the first clothes I could find, rushed downstairs, and nearly collided with Dad in the narrow hallway. When Grandma saw me, her face instantly lit up with that warm, genuine smile I so rarely saw in our house. She opened her arms wide, and I practically crashed into her embrace. "There's my beautiful girl," she exclaimed, pulling me close. Her hug smelled like vanilla cookies and the faint lavender scent I always associated with her visits. When she pulled back to look at me, her eyes sparkled with happiness. "Let me get a good look at you. A high school graduate. What's next, my dear?" We moved into the living room, which looked like something out of a home design magazine. Mom had gone all out, arranging the furniture in perfect symmetry, putting out fresh flowers she'd never cared about before, and even lighting a few decorative candles. I sat down next to Grandma, feeling how her presence filled the room with something real, something sincere. My parents, on the other hand, sat nervously across from us, as if they were on trial. Well, I began, trying to focus on the conversation and ignore Mom's stare burning into me. I got into a few colleges. 2 of them offered me spots. That's wonderful, Samantha. Grandma squeezed my hand tightly. Tell me about them. The state university offered me a full scholarship, I said, noticing how my parents' expressions grew slightly more strained. I knew they weren't thrilled about that option. And then there's a private school. It's pretty prestigious, but the tuition is, I hesitated, about $25,000 a year. Grandma nodded thoughtfully, her soft smile barely visible. She didn't say anything, but her calm, reflective gaze made me feel like she was already working something out in her mind. At that moment, the doorbell rang, and the guests began to arrive. First came Aunt Marie and Uncle Bob, followed by my cousins, and then the family friends trickled in. The backyard filled with the hum of conversation, bursts of laughter, and the smell of grilled meat. Mom darted around the house, playing the role of the perfect hostess, while Dad manned the grill in the backyard, tirelessly flipping burgers and sausages. But one person was missing. Jake. I tried calling him 3 times, but all I got was his voicemail. Finally, I approached Mom, who was setting out plates on the table, and asked, "Are you sure Jake's coming?" "Oh, sweetheart, you know how busy he is," she said without looking up. "He has so much going on with his company, but he'll definitely call you later to wish you a happy birthday." I just nodded, feeling the heat of frustration bubbling inside me. Jake always found excuses to avoid family events, especially if they had anything to do with me. And yet, this was my day. Couldn't he, for once, make an effort? By midday, the party was in full swing. People were chatting, laughing, and raising toasts to my health. Even Grandma Eleanor seemed content, discussing recipes and the latest news with the guests. Yet, I still felt like an outsider at my own celebration. Every laugh, every smile seemed forced, as if everyone was playing along to a carefully written script. At one point, Grandma took my hand and led me aside, away from the commotion. "Samantha," she began softly, her voice full of care. "You seem upset. Is it about the colleges? Or is it something else?" Her attention was so genuine that I almost broke down right there. But instead, I smiled, trying to mask the bitterness with a facade of calm. "I'm fine, Grandma," I replied, though in that moment, I wanted to scream about everything that was churning inside me. She squinted slightly, as if she could see right through me, but said nothing more. She simply patted my hand, and we returned to the guests. Deep down, I knew the day wasn't over yet, and something bigger awaited me, something I hadn't anticipated. The next morning, after a quick breakfast, Grandma Eleanor looked fresh and lively, despite the previous day's excitement. She sat at our kitchen table, carefully folding a napkin and sipping her signature morning tea. Her calm presence filled the house like a ray of morning sunlight streaming through the curtains. I found myself wishing I could stretch this moment out forever, as being around Grandma always felt easy and comforting. Mom and Dad bustled around her like 2 anxious sparrows. Mom kept offering more tea or something to eat, despite the table already being laden with food. Dad, unable to hide his emotions, looked visibly tense and uneasy, barely contributing to the conversation. I noticed how his eyes kept darting toward Grandma's handbag, as if he were waiting for her to pull out another envelope. "Samantha, dear, do you have any plans for today?" Grandma asked, focusing her attention entirely on me. "Not really," I said, feeling the warmth of her voice push away the tension that lingered in the room. "I was thinking about going for a walk or maybe helping you with something if you need it." "A walk sounds lovely," she said with a smile. "Why don't we take a stroll through the park? There's something I'd like to talk to you about." Mom froze with a mug in her hand, her gaze flicking between me and Grandma, but she didn't say a word. Dad just cleared his throat and muttered something as he carried an empty plate to the sink. Half an hour later, we were walking along the green path in the local park. The weather was perfect, gentle breezes, birds chirping, and the fresh scent of grass in the air. As always, Grandma moved slowly, savoring every step as if enjoying each moment. I walked beside her, feeling her hand lightly brush against mine as we matched our pace. "You're probably thinking this was a very sudden gift," she began, not looking at me. Her gaze was fixed ahead, but her voice was calm and assured. "But, Samantha, I've wanted to do something like this for a long time. I was just waiting for the right moment." It was unexpected, I admitted honestly. "But, Grandma, it means everything to me. I don't even know how to thank you." She stopped and turned to face me, placing her warm hands on my shoulders. "You've already thanked me, my dear, by growing into such a smart, determined, and kind young woman. All I want from you is to live your life to the fullest, without worrying about anyone else's expectations. This is your life, Samantha. It's up to you to decide what you'll make of it." Her words struck something deep within me. I suddenly felt tears streaming down my face, not from sadness or frustration, but from relief, as though the weight I'd carried for years was finally lifting. "Thank you, Grandma," was all I could manage to say. We continued our walk, chatting about little things, what kinds of flowers I liked, what style of clothes might suit me for college, and even what to try at the local Brinton cafeteria. Every piece of advice she gave was filled with care, and I absorbed it all like a sponge. When we returned home, the atmosphere in the house felt even more tense than it had in the morning. Mom greeted us at the door with a strained smile, clearly trying to mask her irritation. "You've been gone a long time," she said, glancing at the clock. "Samantha, you didn't forget that we need to discuss college, did you?" "I've already talked it over with Grandma," I replied, surprised by the sharpness in her tone. "Sarah, let the girl rest," Grandma said gently, heading to the living room. "After last night, she needs a little peace and quiet." Mom pressed her lips together but said nothing, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I went upstairs to my room, feeling the tension linger in the air like a shadow following me. That evening, I noticed my parents whispering to each other in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but I caught fragments of their conversation. The check. "We can't let her control this. What are we supposed to do now?" I knew they were talking about Grandma and her gift. They were clearly unhappy with how things had turned out. Still, I didn't care. Grandma's words echoed in my mind. "This is your life, Samantha." And for the first time in a long while, I truly felt like it was. Grandma hugged me tightly before leaving, her voice warm like the soft rustle of leaves. "We'll figure it all out, Samantha. Call me if you need anything," she said before getting into her Toyota Camry. I stood there for a long time, watching her car disappear around the corner, trying to process how much my life had changed in just one day. The check sitting in my room felt like a symbol of freedom, like a door to a world where I could finally become who I wanted to be. But, as is often the case in our family, happiness didn't last long. Late in the evening, Jake finally showed up. He walked in without knocking, as if the house still belonged to him, and immediately filled the space with his dark, brooding presence. His expensive designer clothes were wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept in days. "Happy birthday, sis," he muttered, brushing past me in the hallway. No hug, no card, not even a forced smile. All he left behind was the scent of expensive cologne and the unsettling feeling that his presence was about to shatter my world. Jake headed straight to the kitchen, where Mom and Dad greeted him with quiet, tense phrases. I stayed in the hallway, listening to their muffled voices. They tried to sound calm, but even through the walls, I could sense that this conversation wasn't about my party or my future. At dinner, the atmosphere grew even heavier. Jake sat across from me, slouched in his chair, glued to his phone. His fingers nervously tapped against the screen, as if he was searching for answers to all his problems in it. I tried to eat in silence but could barely swallow a bite. "Samantha, sweetheart, we need to have a serious talk," Dad finally said, pushing his fork aside. His face was grim, his voice strained with forced calmness. I looked up, noticing how Mom shot a quick glance at Dad, almost like a signal. They'd clearly rehearsed this moment. "Your brother is going through a tough time right now," Dad began. "His auto parts business, well, things aren't going as we'd all hoped." Jake suddenly looked up from his phone, his face twisting with irritation. "The banks are breathing down my neck," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. "I took out a few loans to expand the business, but the market crashed. Now they're demanding their money back." I couldn't help but let out a short, sharp laugh, louder than I'd intended. "Really? Funny how you managed to balance your hard times with a vacation to Hawaii. And with a different girl in every picture, no less." Jake's face flushed red with anger. "Stay out of my business, Samantha," he snapped, gripping his phone so tightly it looked like he might break it. "Enough, both of you," Dad interjected, his stern gaze shifting between me and Jake. "This isn't a joke, Samantha. Jake could lose everything." I pushed my plate aside, my appetite completely gone. "And what does that have to do with me?" I asked coldly. Mom and Dad exchanged a glance, as if they'd been waiting for that exact question. Mom leaned forward, resting her hands on the table like she was about to explain something important. "Sweetheart," she began in her sickly sweet tone, "family always helps family. You know that's what we've always taught you." At that moment, I felt the blood freeze in my veins. Each word she spoke became painfully clear. "We think," Dad continued, "that the money Grandma gave you could help Jake. It would help him get out of this situation." The world around me seemed to go silent. I sat there motionless, their words echoing in my head. "You want me to give Jake the money Grandma gave me for college?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "It makes sense," Jake chimed in, suddenly animated. "The business is more important than some degree you might not even use." "That money is for my education," I said sharply, anger rising in my chest like a wave. "Grandma gave it to me specifically for Brington." "You still have the full ride to the state university," Mom interjected, trying to appear calm. "You wouldn't lose anything." "But Jake, he needs the money now." "No," I said firmly, the word bursting out of me with such force it seemed to vibrate in the air. "That money is mine. Grandma gave it to me." The room fell into a deafening silence. Jake froze, his eyes burning with fury. Mom's hands clenched tightly, her face tense. Dad leaned back in his chair, as if my words had knocked the wind out of him. I got up from the table without saying another word and went to my room. Behind the closed door, I stood still, listening to the muffled whispers coming from downstairs. But all I felt was a strange sense of relief. This time, I had chosen myself. Grandma didn't wait for my father to interrupt. Her voice cut through the air like thunder splitting the night sky, cold and unyielding. "I warned you, David. I turned a blind eye to how you treated Samantha because I hoped you would come to your senses. But today, you've crossed the line." Dad tried to respond, but she raised her hand, as if he could see her through the phone, and continued. "You threatened your daughter. You raised a hand against her. And now you dare to lie to my face?" A tense silence hung on the other end of the line. I could hear Dad whisper something to Mom, followed by her anxious voice. "Mom, please don't jump to conclusions. This is just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Grandma interrupted, her voice trembling with outrage. "Samantha is standing in front of me with bruises on her wrists, telling me how you locked her in her room and threatened to throw her out of the house. How can you call that a misunderstanding? Mom fell silent, and I heard a deep sigh from Dad. Mom, you don't understand the whole situation. We were just trying to help Jake. He really needs the money. Grandma scoffed. And why is Jake in this situation? Because you've spent his whole life letting him believe he could do whatever he wanted without consequences? Because you indulged his every whim, even at Samantha's expense? It's not that simple, Mom, Dad said desperately, trying to justify himself. It's exactly that simple, David, Grandma snapped. From now on, Samantha will stay with me. You've both proven that you're incapable of taking care of her. Her words hung in the air like a verdict. I froze, staring at her. I knew she was on my side, but I never imagined she would go this far. Mom, you can't do this, Dad said quietly, his voice pleading. This will tear our family apart. No, David, Grandma replied, her voice heavy with sadness. You already tore it apart. She ended the call with the press of a button and turned to me. Her face was firm, but her eyes glowed with care. I won't let them hurt you again, sweetheart, she said, pulling me into her arms. I buried my face in her shoulder as tears began to stream down my cheeks. They were a mix of relief, bitterness, and gratitude. That evening, Grandma insisted that I eat dinner, even though I felt like I couldn't swallow a single bite. We sat at her small, cozy kitchen table, which felt so familiar and safe. Grandma talked about how she planned to help me prepare for my admission to Brington. We'll do everything right, Samantha. You'll have the chance to start a new life, she said, pouring me another cup of tea. The night was restless. Despite the warmth of Grandma's home, I still felt uneasy. Every sound outside made me flinch, expecting to see my father's figure or hear his booming voice. But the house remained quiet, and eventually, I fell asleep, feeling safe for the first time in what felt like forever. In the morning, Grandma sat at her desk with a notebook and her phone. She began making calls to the college, confirming details about application deadlines, fees, and other requirements. Her sense of order and determination calmed me. You have nothing to worry about, she said after finishing her last call. All you need to do is be yourself and focus on your studies. I'll take care of the rest. Her words sounded like a promise, one I knew she would keep. That day, I decided to tell her everything, every detail about how I had always felt like an outsider in my family, how every holiday had been a reminder that I was secondary. Grandma listened silently, occasionally nodding or squeezing my hands. You've been strong, Samantha, she said when I finally finished. Stronger than anyone else in your family. Her words became a source of strength for me. I didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was clear: would never let anyone control my life again. Toward the evening, I checked my phone. There were dozens of messages and missed calls from my parents. Each one was either a threat or an attempt to guilt-trip me. I deleted them all without hesitation. When Grandma noticed me looking at my phone, she said, "Don't worry about them. You have me." Her confidence steadied me. For the first time, I felt like I had a chance to start over. I could barely suppress a smirk. My father's words sounded like a pathetic attempt to manipulate me, but this time I was ready. I raised my eyes to meet his, the same eyes that once filled me with fear and uncertainty, but now seemed hollow, as if even he understood the futility of his efforts. I've already helped my family, I said coldly. I helped myself. That's all I needed to do. Mom leaned forward, her face a mixture of pleading desperation and faint irritation. Samantha, you have to understand, she began, her voice trembling. We're just trying to fix things. We want to bring everything back to the way it used to be. I let out a short laugh, not of anger, but of pity. Did they really think things could go back to the way they were? I rested my elbows on the table, laced my fingers together, and looked at them the way I imagined Grandma must have looked at Dad when he was a boy. The way it used to be? I said. When you ignored me for Jake. When I got the scraps of your attention because you always had more important things to deal with? I shook my head. No, Mom. Nothing is going back. I'm not going to be part of your game anymore. Dad's expression darkened further. His hands were clasped so tightly that his knuckles turned white. It looked like he was fighting the urge to say something, but his face told me he already knew he'd lost. Samantha, he finally said, his voice heavy, as if dragging the words out from deep within himself, we've lost you. Those words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, images from the past flashed through my mind. Mom laughing at some silly thing I'd done as a child, Dad tossing me high in the air, Jake sharing his latest interests. Those were the rare moments when I felt like part of a family. But they had long since become just memories, and no apology could bring them back. You didn't lose me, I said quietly, leaning back from the table. You never had me. Mom inhaled sharply, as though my words had wounded her, but I knew it wasn't real pain. It was shock, a confrontation with the truth she had refused to acknowledge. Samantha, please, she said, but I stood up, grabbing my backpack to end the conversation. If you want to make things right with Grandma, that's between you and her, I said, looking directly at Dad. But don't involve me. I'm not going to be your middleman. I turned toward the door, leaving them sitting at the table. Behind me, I could hear the muffled sounds of their arguments, but I wasn't listening anymore. The air outside was cool, and I took a deep breath, feeling the tension begin to melt away. When I got back to my room, I found a note on my desk from my neighbor, Sarah. Samantha, I bought your favorite chocolate cupcakes. They're in the kitchen. Let's talk when you're back. I smiled as I read her neat handwriting. The world I was building around myself was still fragile, but it was mine. The phone on my desk blinked with new messages. I knew who they were from but didn't bother to check. Instead, I opened my laptop to finish an article for the university newspaper. The words flowed easily, each paragraph reflecting not only the story I was writing but also the strength I had gained. By midnight, when the city had grown quiet, I received a message from Grandma. How did it go? Are you okay? Her short text was full of care and support. I quickly typed back, I'm fine. Thank you for being here for me. Lying in bed, I realized that the meeting with my parents hadn't been a coincidence. It was a test, a trial that helped me fully understand that I was no longer the Samantha who depended on their approval or attention. Now I had my own path, my own goals, and the people who truly believed in me. Grandma's words echoed in my mind more and more, like a constant reminder that I had made the right choice. Every time I thought about what was happening back home, I felt a strange mix of emotions, a slight pang of guilt and a deep gratitude for the chance to live my own life. Grandma was right. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their own choices. I continued my studies at Brington, and with each passing day, I grew more confident. My name began to appear in the pages of the university newspaper. The articles I wrote were gaining attention, and professors increasingly singled me out among my peers. I found a circle of friends with whom I could truly be myself, and for the first time in my life, I felt that my voice mattered. Still, the shadow of the past occasionally lingered. In early December, when the campus was blanketed in its first snow, I received another call from Aunt Marie. Samantha, it's Marie, she said, her voice quiet and cautious, as always. I need to talk to you about your parents. I almost hung up. Too often, her calls brought news that seemed to pull my life backward. But something in her tone made me stay on the line. What happened? I asked, trying not to sound too cold. They're desperate, she continued. Jake is back to his schemes. This time, he's gotten into cryptocurrency and is convinced it's his chance to fix everything. But your parents. They've gone deeper into debt to help him. They're selling furniture now and even planning to sell the car. I stayed silent, listening to her story, feeling old emotions begin to stir. I pitied them. And yet, I was angry that they were putting Jake on a pedestal once again, even after he'd destroyed everything they had. You don't have to do anything, Marie added, as if reading my thoughts. I just thought you should know. Thanks for telling me, I said, ending the call shortly after. The phone sat on my desk, and I stared at it, feeling a storm brewing inside me. Part of me wanted to do something, to step in, to explain to my parents that they were ruining their own lives. But then I remembered Grandma's words, "It's not my job to fix their mistakes." During the holidays, I went to Grandma's house again. Her home was decorated for Christmas, bright lights wrapped around the railings, and an old-fashioned tree stood in the living room, adorned with antique ornaments she'd kept since her youth. We spent a few days talking about my progress in school and my plans for the future. She was my biggest supporter, always interested in every little detail. "Are you happy, Samantha?" she asked one evening as we drank tea by the window. Outside, the snowfall had turned the world into a true winter wonderland. "Very," I replied, looking into her kind eyes. "And it's all thanks to you, Grandma." She smiled, but there was a trace of sadness in her expression. "You did all the work yourself," she said. "I just gave you a chance. But, I'm sorry your parents couldn't see how special you are." Her words struck me deeply, even though I knew she didn't mean to hurt me. Memories of years of neglect came flooding back. Birthdays when I received cards instead of gifts, moments when my achievements went unnoticed. I thought I'd stop thinking about it, I admitted. But sometimes it all comes back. Grandma reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. "That's normal, Samantha," she said softly. "Wounds don't heal overnight. But you're doing everything right. You're building your own life, and that's what matters." After the holidays, I returned to university with renewed energy. I threw myself into my studies, my work at the newspaper, and long discussions with friends. But in early February, I received another call, this time from my mom. "Samantha, we want to talk," she said. Her voice was warm, but there were hints of tension beneath the surface. "We were wrong. We want to make things right." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe that they had finally understood, but another part was afraid to give them another chance. "Samantha, are you there?" Mom repeated. "Yes," I replied, but this time I didn't add anything else. I knew this was a decision I wouldn't make now, not over the phone, but only when I felt ready. If I ever felt ready at all.